Okay. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm audible to all of you. Dr. Shivali, can you hear us?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Dr. Deshmukh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Dr. Sunil Singh, can you hear me? Oh, he's muted anyway. Thank you so much for joining in for today's talk on writing and dissecting scientific papers by Dr. John F. Leslie. This event is jointly organized by the Association of Fungal Biologists and the National Fungal Culture Collection of India, a part of ARI, Pune, India. First of all, thank you very much to the speaker, Dr. John F. Leslie, for agreeing to give this talk, and I welcome him to today's program. I now request, I also welcome today's audience for kindly joining in for today's program. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Now I request Dr. Sunil Kumar Deshmukh, the President of Association of Fungal Biologists, to say a few words and probably to welcome the speaker, welcome the audience, and so a few words about the Association of Fungal Biologists. Dr. Sunil Kumar Deshmukh, please.
Good morning and welcome to the webinar on submitting manuscripts and getting them accepted by Professor John S. Leslie, Director, Fungal Genetic Stock Center, Kansas University, Kansas, USA. Actually, the Association of Fungal Biologists is a scientific body with broader interest in advancing mycology and cater to the need of mycologists worldwide. It is a very recently established association formed in April 2022. The association was formed to bring together mycologists with the broad objective of promoting and disseminating knowledge on different facets of mycology from wide perspective. The major emphasis has been laid to the application of mycology to harness the biotechnical potential of microfungi as well as macrofungi for human welfare. There are about 250 members, life members, including professional, budding mycologists, students with varied interests and capabilities in fungal taxonomy, phylogeny, ecology, pathology, physiology, genetics, molecular biology, biotechnology, and allied fields. It also fosters collaboration, the exchange of ideas, the exploration of innovative approaches by studying and harvesting fungal potential. This helps advance our understanding of fungi and their significance in addressing global challenges, for fostering sustainable practices and promoting overall well-being. This is a platform to networking opportunities, helping disseminating cutting-edge research and inspiring the participants to contribute to mycology. We had first annual meeting in December 2023 at Mumbai, second at Pune in October 24, and next is scheduled in December 2025 at Kolhapur. The society is not only restricted to the Indian subcontinent, it extends its invitation to international mycologists to join the society for furtherance. You are invited to join the Association for Further Biologists and take advantage of webinar, conference, and its other activity. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Dr. Sunil Kumar Deshmukh, the President of Association of Fungal Biologists, for your kind words and introducing the association to today's audience. Now I request Dr. Sanjay Singh, the head of the National Fungal Collection of India, to say a few words on this occasion. Dr. Sanjay Singh, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sinha. And at the outset, I would like to welcome all the participants for this very, very important and informative session by Professor John Leslie. And you know that the Agharkar Research Institute is a very premier institution established way back in 1946, in fact, before independence. And the Mycology and Plant Pathology department at this institute was established together with the founding of the institution. So mycology department was very well known in India and abroad. So because of the expertise we have in the basic fundamental mycology and biology systematics. So 2008, TST Government of India established, a national facility for fungi at this institute because of the expertise we have and because of the vast geography of India. The couple of culture collection is not going to suffice the purpose of the biotech industry in India, in the country like India. So since then, since 2008, National Facility for Culture Collection of Fungi is established, and we have been continuing on several activity. We have the important mandate of the capacity building training program, and since then we are organizing the national level training program, and we have recently concluded the 14th batch of the national level training program in the last month. Also, we have our own R&D program, and with the expertise available at this center, we are providing a lot of knowledge-based services to academia, industry, and many other person, but more concise, precisely to the Indian diaspora. We are providing these services because of the regulatory framework. So, without taking much time, I would we would like to listen the Professor J.S. Leslie, who has come along all the way from the USA, and he's been staying with us. And I'm very much thankful to the Professor Leslie for sparing his valuable time and spending some time today with the audience of AFB, MycoAsia, and NFCCI participants. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sanjay Singh, for introducing ARI and NFCCI to this audience, and for collaborating with the Association of Fungal Biologists for this event. And yes, we are very much eager to listen to Professor Leslie. Before that, I request Dr. Shivali Rana, the scientist from NFCCI, to introduce the speaker to today's audience. Dr. Shivali Rana, please.
Thank you, sir. Am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. It is my honor to introduce today's distinguished speaker, Professor John Leslie, a globally renowned scientist whose groundbreaking work has significantly advanced our understanding of fungal biology, particularly in genetics, pathogenicity, and mycotoxins of genus Fusarium. Professor Leslie is a university distinguished professor at Kansas State University, where he has built an illustrious career spanning nearly 4 decades. His pioneering research has shaped our knowledge of Fusarium species, focusing on its genetic mechanisms, their role in plant diseases, and the production of harmful mycotoxins with implications for agriculture and food security. His academic journey began with a BA in Biology and Mathematics from the University of Dallas, followed by a MS degree and PhD degree in Genetics from University of Wisconsin. A postdoctoral fellowship at Stanford University provided the foundation for his remarkable career. Professor Leslie's editorial contributions are unparalleled. He has served on the board of leading journals with over 170 peer-reviewed publications, 7 books, and a Google Scholar H-index of 74. His work has been cited more than 23,000 times, a clear testament to its global impact. Beyond his exceptional research, Professor Leslie has profoundly influenced the next generations of scientists. He has mentored numerous MS and PhD students, postdoctoral fellows, and sabbatical researchers. Since 2000, he has also coordinated the annual Fusarium Laboratory Workshop, training over 750 scientists from 78 countries. His contributions extend beyond academia. As a Jefferson Science Fellow at the U.S. State Department, Professor Leslie's work on global food security initiatives, bridging scientific knowledge with policy to address agricultural challenges worldwide. Today, we have the privilege of hearing from Professor Leslie on the topic of immense importance to researchers, that is submitting manuscripts and getting them accepted. Drawing from his extensive experience as an author, reviewer, and editor, He will share practical insights to help us navigate the publication process successfully. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor John Leslie.
Thank you, Dr. Shivali Rana, for that kind introduction of the speaker, Professor Leslie, to the today's audience. Professor Leslie, the platform is all yours. You may please start your presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, thanks very much for this invitation. And what I'm going to do is to discuss I've taught scientific writing in a number of different contexts, and this is the topic that usually gets people's attention the most. How do I submit my manuscript and get it accepted? So we'll go over that briefly today and hopefully give you some ideas that will make your life a little easier whenever you get to do this the next time. Okay, now how do I move this? Always good with somebody else's computer, you know? So the first thing you have to do when you look at your paper is make sure you've answered the question. What's the message I want to convey? When somebody finishes reading your paper and thinks about it a week later, what do you want them to remember? Because that's what you want to focus your presentation on. And the format we're going to talk about today, there are a number of different ones, but the format we'll talk about today is a research article. So the first thing you have to think about is who's the real audience for your message? Was that a question? Who's the real audience for my message? Or so what? Is it going to lead to widespread changes? Are there concepts and practices that might be altered? Another way to think about it is who cares? Is it just you and the people in your lab, or some specialists working with your particular fungus or in your particular area? Is it a general group? Are most mycologists going to care? Are most of biologists going to care? Scientists in general, non-scientists? Because the more of those people that will care, the higher the level of a journal you can submit it to. But you have to be realistic when you're making this assessment. And you want to avoid what we call salami science, where you slice it so thin you can see through it. This increases your number of publications, but it doesn't necessarily increase your impact, because people won't necessarily connect all of the pieces you would like them to connect. Okay, how do you figure out what the right journal is? So this is an interesting question. It's been a question for the last 40 years of my career. And you can look at several different things. You can look at the circulation of the journal. Who is likely to be reading it to begin with? You can check for the suitability of the audience and the content. Look at some issues of the journal. Will your paper be at home amongst those particular articles? Does it come there? Check the speed and the frequency of the publication. The frequency is usually easy. They'll tell you if it's monthly or bi-monthly or quarterly, something like that. But then look at the acceptance date for a paper and how long it takes for it actually to appear. You get around some of this now when they post a edited version on the web. But in general, the shorter the time between acceptance and publication is important. Often you look at journal impact. You find this usually in journal citation reports, although their Scopus now has it as well. Everybody wants a high impact, but you have to realize that a high impact journal usually has a high rejection rate as well. So you have to be prepared if they tell you no. Check for the language. Usually it's English. Sometimes it's something else, but usually it's English. If it's open access, what are the fees and what are the conditions? Usually it's a CC license of some sort, and most of those are perfectly acceptable for much of what we do. If you've got questions, then send an email to the editor. They should be able to help you make a decision. Nothing like going backwards. Now, if you pick the wrong journal, there's some things that can happen. The best thing if you pick the wrong journal is there's no review and they immediately send it back to you. So you lose a week or two, but you can submit it someplace else. The next best thing that can happen is they review it and they say, you know, gee, this is a great paper on elephants, but this is a microbiology journal. And so it's not appropriate for us. And then you can get the poor review or the slow review, and they ask you for an inadequate revision. You know, I don't understand why they needed so much material. You know, couldn't they just grind the entire organism and put it in a test tube and work with that? Okay, if you're working with the elephant, that's a tough thing to do. And then the worst result of all, your manuscript's published, but it's published someplace so obscure that nobody else ever finds it to read it, and you have no impact at all. So as you're looking at publishing mycology type journals, make sure that you're publishing in places where other mycologists will read it. It doesn't have to be a mycology journal. Most of us read some things in microbiology journals, and many of us read things related to our specific area. So I read a lot of genetics journals, for example, in addition to mycology things. Now, this is the definition of a scientific paper from the Council on Biological Editors. And usually I don't read a slide, but I read this one because it's important. An acceptable primary scientific publication, which is what you're writing, must be the first disclosure. And by first disclosure, that does not, things that are preprints usually don't count. Things presented at meetings don't count. But it has to be the first disclosure that contains sufficient information to enable your peers to do several things. One, they have to assess the observations. Do they understand what you saw? Second, they have to be able to repeat your experiments. And third, they have to evaluate the intellectual processes, the thinking that leads to your conclusions. It has to be susceptible to sensory perception. And I used to think that just meant you had to be able to read it on a page, but you also can hear things. And in some cases you can taste things. So, but it has to be something that you can touch or taste or sense or read in some way. It has to be available to the scientific community without restriction. And that doesn't mean that it has to be free. It just means that you have to be able to get it if you want it. And it has to be available for screening by one or more of the recognized secondary services. So if you publish in a journal and they charge a fee, it's considered okay. The problem comes, suppose you work for a company, and a lot of the pharmaceutical companies, for example, publish a journal internally, but you can't read that journal unless you are working for that particular company. That's considered to be unavailable. You also have to be original. When you submit a paper other than a review to a journal, it normally implies that it presents the results of original research or some new ideas not previously published. It's not under consideration for publication elsewhere. And if it's accepted by this journal, it will not be published elsewhere, either in English or in any other language, without the consent of the editors. One of the implications here is you can send only to one journal at a time. You have to wait for them to make the decision before you decide what you want to do with the paper. And it's important to remember that it is your decision. Duplicate publication, okay, like I said, submit only to one journal at a time. You can't send it to 5 journals and say, I'm going to pick the best one that says yes first. Doesn't work that way, one at a time. You can't publish data twice, even if the text is rewritten. It has to be summarized and referenced. If you've got anything that you think might be a prior publication, it's very important to tell the editor. If you don't tell the editor in advance and something is determined to be already published, then you're subject to ethics violations and you can be sanctioned. Not what you want to have happen. Sometimes they'll let you publish your paper in another language, but you always have to check with the journal first, with the editor, to make sure that you can do that. And here's a really important one. You've got a really great paper, and there's going to be a press release on it from your institution. If that press release goes out before the journal actually publishes, then it violates a number of journal policies. So, for example, Science or PNAS or some of these Nature, they may say, well, that press release is now your publication. And what we have is secondhand rather than firsthand. And they'll withdraw your paper and not publish it. And that's the last thing you want if you've got a great story to tell. Oh, figures, images. There are some things you can do that are okay. You can adjust contrast across the entire image. That's usually okay. You can cut the image. You can crop the image for size. But when you do, it implies you're not leaving something important out. If you add something to the image other than, for example, an arrow or an indicator of some sort, usually it's considered fraud. Don't put another band on the gel. That's the wrong thing to do. You have to be prepared to submit the original unmanipulated image file. That effectively is the raw data for that figure. The Journal of Cell Biology found a few years ago that about 25% of the submitted images were manipulated inappropriately and that they had to be redone before they were considered acceptable. So this is a problem. And the journals are now often routinely checking for it. So if you think you might get away with it, you might, but you're much more likely to have to fix something. Images from different files can be in the same figure, but they have to be separated by thin lines, white or black usually. It's called tooling, and it indicates that they're not part of the same image. And you're probably going to be required to say when you submit the manuscript that there's been no manipulation occurring. You'll be asked to put things in your paper in this form: introduction, materials and methods, results, and discussion. This is very important. If you don't have it in this form, the journal will often return the manuscript to you without even looking at it any further. They not only will not send it for review, they'll simply send it back and say, this is the wrong form, submit it in the right form, and we'll process it further. This is a standard recipe for formal papers, and variations generally are not encouraged. It saves space and money for the journals, and it makes it easier for reviewers and for people who are reading it. You know what to go look for when you want to try to find something. There are a few variations they'll let you get away with. If you've got a descriptive field case, so a new plant disease, a descriptive clinical case, a new human or animal disease, those have got different formats. If you've got an unusual section of some sort of math derivation or computer program, they may have you put that in a different section. Sometimes the journal will alter the order, and when they do, they usually put materials and methods last. Sometimes they will allow you to combine materials and methods and results to get an experimental section. This is more common in chemical type journals than it is in biological journals. Some will allow you to combine the results and the discussion. And I have some thoughts on that. In my experience, if the paper is more than about 8 pages long, it's long enough to have a separate results and discussion section. Often when you find the two combined together, you find that if there are 10 paragraphs, 9 of them are results, 1 of them are discussion. Okay, that's easy to write. But the problem is people are interested in the thinking that goes into your paper, the thinking that goes into the discussion. So effectively what you're doing is you're taking all of the novelty of your paper and you're just throwing it away. It is not a reasonable thing to do to simply say, well, here's all my data, and the reader can figure out what's important. That's not a good way to publish a paper, because for the most part, the reader will simply ignore your paper. You have to provide the information for why it's important, and usually you do that in the discussion. If you hide it all in the middle of your results, people won't find it. You really need to separate the results and the discussion into 2 separate sections. That's very important. The best way to make an enemy out of a friend is to fight over who's the author of a paper. This needs to be decided before the work is started. Everybody has to be involved with the work. And some journals are now specifically asking who's responsible for what parts of the paper. Usually you must participate in at least 2 of these things: designing the experiments, doing the experiments, analyzing the data, and writing the manuscript itself. Notice that you do not have to do experiments in order to be an author on a paper. Notice also that simply because you do the experiments does not necessarily make you an author on the paper. You have to do at least 2 of these things in order to be there. Some would say you have to do 3. The other thing you have to do is accept the intellectual responsibility for the work, the entire work, no matter what part of it you did. If it's wonderful, every author gets a bit of the glory. And if it's awful, then every author gets a bit of the shame or the bad reputation. So make sure when you send a paper out with your name on it, that it really is a good paper that you want other people to be able to read. Okay, when do you need to do what kinds of things? First, you need to start writing while the work is in progress. One of the biggest mistakes is to say, oh, I'll get all my experiments done, and then I'll go start writing things up. That virtually always leads to the opportunity to do a few more experiments to fill in some holes that you don't find until you've finished writing the paper. You need to identify the objectives. What is it that you're trying to do? What's the message you want to convey? What experiments do you need to do to convey that message? And then you do the experiments that meet those objectives. It's easy to sit and do another experiment, but will it add anything? And if it does, what will it add? You need to work from an outline or some sort of organizational plan. Everybody works a little different for those, and you've got to have something that helps you organize it so that you can see when you're finished. A common order to write in is not the same order that you read the paper in. Often you write the materials and methods first because you can do that before you walk into the lab. The results get written with tables and figures next, and the introduction and the abstract come after that because they have to introduce the ideas that are in the paper, and talk about why they are important. Last of all, you have the abstract. And you always think, well, I can write the abstract first. And yes, you can. But if you do that, you then have to go back at the end of the paper after you've got it all written and say, gee, do I really have the whole thing here? Or did I miss some pieces? Did I add something after I started writing? It's also important to make frequent backups. You don't want to have to retype the whole darn thing simply because you haven't been saving. And another thing to remember is that longer is not always better. That's also true if you're writing a thesis. I know that there's no major professor out there who smiles when a student hands them a 700-page thesis and says, here it is, I'm done. Usually my reaction to that is, okay, I'm glad you've got all the raw material. You need to cut it down. If you can keep it simple and easy to understand, your chance of being accepted just goes way up. Once you get started with the writing, write in blocks. Write a paragraph or several paragraphs or a section of a paper. But don't stop when you get to the end of it. Instead, if you add a few sentences or thoughts for what you're next going to be writing on, it's easier to start again when you start the next time around. If you get stuck in one place, switch to another section of the paper or even another paper. Don't keep pounding your head on the wall just because you can. If you're eating while you're writing, don't stain papers, especially if it's originals. And you don't want the keyboard to be so sticky that M key is down all the time, every time you hit it. Not the idea. If you're looking for a word and you can't think of what it needs to be, put a placeholder. I often put 3 asterisks in when I know I need to go back to do something. Same thing if you're trying to write a sentence. Leave a space or scribble a thought or put a placeholder of some sort so that you can find it and come back to it. And you need to keep at it. I used to just say you had to do it regularly. And a student said, well, that means I can just do it on December 31st every year, right? That's regular. And so I had to update it and put often. You should be writing every week, probably a half a day. 10% of your time should be spent writing on your manuscripts at a minimum. If you think it's good enough, it probably isn't, and you need to make it good. Okay, a couple of comments on prose style. One of the things you want is for the reader to be able to read your paper easily. And it helps if you keep it short and simple. So minimize the verbiage. It rhymes with garbage. And if you can keep it easy, it helps. The quote from Pascal is very telling. I am writing a longer letter than usual because there is no time to write a short one. It takes time to distill your ideas down into the simplest form for someone else to understand. The subject, verb, object order matters greatly in English. Child eats bear and bear eats child use the same words and have very different meanings. You want to concentrate on putting your sentences together in subject, verb, object order. For top writers, 3/4 of the sentences will be in this form. It's the easiest to read. It's the easiest to understand. If you find that your writing is not going this way, you need to consciously go back and put it together. This is what the reader is expecting. Grace, as they call it, is the goal. You want it to be, the easiest way to say this is that when a reviewer is reading your paper, you want them just to keep reading and not think that they need, oh, look, I need to stop and make a note here. Because the minute they start making notes, they're going to make more than one note. And there are going to be more than one thing for you to do and more than one problem for you to try to deal with. If the paper is graceful, you'll be able to read it very easily and it'll be easily understood. But this requires writing and thinking and honing the paper on your part. Sentences and paragraphs, you want to balance them. You don't want it to all be simple, but you don't want it to all be complicated. If you try to apply readability formulae, forget it. They often don't work very well when they're applied to technical literature. They almost immediately go to the highest possible complicated level if you put parentheses in, and you'll be doing that for literature citations. Keep your sentences in the range of 15 to 20 words for the most part. Figure 10 words per line, so that's a line and a half or 2 lines. Some of them will be a little shorter, some of them will be a little longer, but don't let them get to be over 4 lines. If you end up with a huge number of reference calls, the question is, do you need them all, or can you get rid of some of them and still thoroughly ground the work that you're talking about? If you find you've got a long sentence, then there will be some sort of weak connector in there, an and, an or, a but, or a while. Find that thing and put a period in front of it and start the new sentence. And usually you'll find that the thought is easier to read. Oftentimes you end up with these long sentences as you're editing because you simply add a little more information to that sentence and you add a little more. And what started off as a nice, neat, easy to read sentence suddenly becomes this long floppy thing, and you have to help it out by breaking it up. For paragraphs, in general, aim for more or less a half a page. If they're less than 5 lines, other than in the materials and methods, you need to think about lengthening or merging them. And if you find a sentence that's over 2/3 of a page long, you probably need to be cutting it. There's nothing worse when you're reviewing a paper than to get the introduction and it's 1 paragraph, 3 pages long. It's almost impossible to figure out what's really important, where one idea starts and another idea stops. Statistics, you want to use the simplest test that's available. You don't need to show us that you just got the best grade possible in your stats class. If you have a non-routine test of some sort, then you're going to need to explain it or reference it. And you're going to need to make sure that your statistics are meaningful. Here's an example. 33.3% of the mice used in this experiment were cured by the test drug. 33.3% of the test population were unaffected by the drug and remained in a moribund condition, i.e. they died. And the third mouse got away. Okay, so that's way too much accuracy when you're talking about 3. How many significant digits? In this case, you're only allowed 1. 3 is all you can talk about. You need to look at how many objects you're referring to when you look at the significance of what you're doing. A tendency for biologists is to take all of the digits that come out of a calculator or off of machine output. That's fine. That's what the machine calculated, but the accuracy that they provide often is not warranted. Usually 2 or 3 significant digits is the most that you can have. You want the reviewers and the readers to think that you know what you're doing in terms of interpreting your data. If you end up with 6 significant digits, then they will be asking questions. The abstract is really important because it gets used for a lot of things. There's usually a word limit between 200 and 300 words. 250 is common. You'll need to type it as a single paragraph and think of it as telling a single story. You'll write it all in the past tense because you're talking only about material that is in the current paper. And that's all, those experiments are all finished and done. Then sometimes now are asking for a graphical abstract. If so, they get put together a different way, but they aren't part of this abstract where you're writing text. So no figures, no tables, no literature references. It has to stand by itself and be readable by itself. You generally do not use abbreviations unless they're well known within the field in which you're working. So using DNA as an abbreviation is virtually always accepted. But if you are working with amplified fragment polymorphisms, then an AFLP might not be understood. And most importantly, the abstract is a complete summary of the paper. The phrase "will be discussed" should never be there. You're not writing a teaser. And furthermore, if you've got a computer database and you see the abstract, then you're not getting all the information if there's stuff that will be discussed. Get rid of that whenever you see it and put the information that matters there. This is a real red flag to reviewers and to editors that you haven't thought deeply about it, because it often means you can't identify it. Make sure you summarize all the major points in the paper: objectives, methods, results, conclusions. Make sure the significance is there. Why should the journal be interested in publishing it if it's not significant? Usually it's the last part of the paper written, and sometimes it's the last part of the paper rewritten. But you always want it at the end to make sure that you've got everything that's in the paper, the thinking included. And like I said earlier, it's often published by itself in the secondary literature. So it has to be capable of telling your entire story, even if it doesn't have all the documentation that you would find in the primary paper. Editors and reviewers will use this for all kinds of things. When I was editing Applied and Environmental Microbiology, and I was getting effectively a new paper every day, I didn't read the entire paper before I tried to assign reviewers. I would read the abstract and use it. Similarly, reviewers often now get a copy of the abstract of the paper that they can read before they decide if they want to review it. If you don't tell the whole story, then you don't necessarily get good reviews or good reviewers. Here's a journal suggestion tool if you've got a title or an abstract, if you're trying to figure out where to send it. jane.biosemantics.org. You get an output that looks like this. These are a number of different places you might consider sending it. These are the different types of access that it has. Is it indexed in Medline? Is it in PubMed Central? Is it open access? This is the confidence that the program has that you would fit there. Here is an article influence. So things that are published there, how much influence do they have on the literature? And you might decide, for example, that, well, this one down here, this ACS chemical biology, might really be where I want to try to put it because of the large impact, the influence that it has on articles that it have on the field. even though with this chemical example, you might fit better in the Journal of Chromatographic Science. But this is a very easy tool to use and can really help you as you try to select where to publish your article. The last paragraph of the introduction is also a critical thing. Other than the abstract, this is the most important paragraph in your manuscript. It only needs to have 3 sentences. One of them the objective, one of them states the hypothesis, and the other the significance. You're telling the reader what you wanted to do, why you were trying to do it, and why it's important that you did it. Often there'll be a conclusion paragraph at the end of the discussion that will restate these things and go through why they are important. Effectively, what you are doing is you are providing the criteria. You're telling the editor and the reviewer, this is what we tried to do and why it's important. If you do not provide this information, then the reader will make it up, and they may or may not come to the same things that you have for what were your objectives, what were your hypotheses, and what were the significance of the results. Okay, when you're getting ready to submit your paper, there's some technical things you have to do. First, go find the instructions to authors and follow them. Depending on the journal, they may or may not even look at the paper if you haven't got it in the right format. Make sure you use headers and subheaders, especially in the results and materials and methods. If you've got unusual characters or equations, you need to make sure that they show up the right way. And you need to have wide margins, at least 1 inch on all of the sides. If you're doing it on a computer, you should have plenty of space, because if you've got more pages, fine. Use a word processor, check spelling, and make sure when you're checking spelling, you're checking for where it's going. If it's going to an American journal, use the American English Dictionary. If it's going to a place where British English is spoken, use the British English Dictionary. Usually use 12-point type, and it's usually a serif type. So here, you see the feet on the F and the little balls on the end of the F or the R. Those are the serifs. This is a sans serif typeface here. A serif typeface is usually easier to read if you're reading something from a paper, whereas if you're reading something on a screen for a lecture, then usually you want a sans serif typeface. Oops. Double space everything. Again, you don't care about length, but make it easier for people to be able to write corrections on there. So double space the text, the legends, the references, the tables, and the title page. Number the pages, number the lines. If people are going to make comments, you want them to be able to find the right things to talk about. Indent the paragraphs or separate them by a line so that we know where a new paragraph starts. And leave what's called a ragged right edge. So don't adjust so that you get a straight line on the right. And don't hyphenate. If you hyphenate and the paper is accepted, then the hyphens may persist. And if they persist, they could end up in the middle of a line and look very awkward. So here are some things that may prevent publication in a good journal. If the paper or its substance is publicly available in any of these kinds of things, you can have problems. If it's in a book, if it's in another article somewhere, if it's in a full conference report or symposium proceedings that have got all of the details you expect to find in a paper, if it's a technical bulletin, if it's a company white paper, Often those have all of the same pieces you find in a regular paper. If it's been posted on a public website, but notice that preprints are usually treated differently. This can be a very touchy subject, so ask an editor before you submit a paper if you've got this consideration to think about. The substance of a paper is not necessary. You can tell the editor what it is, but the editor gets to decide what the substance of the paper is. These things usually won't prevent publication in a good journal. You can do these. If you post a method or a protocol on a website, usually you're okay. If you've posted a limited amount of original data on a personal website of some sort, or a website of a small collaborative group, you can deposit unpublished sequence data, proteins, DNA, in a public database. You can talk about at a meeting about your work, publish abstracts, put up a poster, give a presentation. And you can post theses and dissertations on a personal or a university website. None of these things will usually prevent stuff from being published. Content. You have to watch for plagiarism. It's become almost an art in itself for people to screen papers and try to determine if anything's copied. They'll even go for self-plagiarism. The only place you can avoid this usually is in the materials and methods when there's only one way to describe what you're doing. When you look at the sections of your manuscript, you should be able to identify a topic sentence in each paragraph. Especially for the introduction and the discussion, these should provide a good outline or summary of these sections. If you read the topic sentences and they make sense and they tell you the story, then you got it right. But if they seem funny or out of place or like something's missing, then you need to go back and order the paragraphs again. You need to make sure your abstract reflects your manuscript, that the last paragraph of the intro's got the objectives, hypotheses, and significance statements. And then you need to proofread the manuscript. You need to pull out the typos. You need to make sure that the subjects and the verbs agree. You need to do all of those things before you submit it. You don't have to, but if people will get slowed down because they're having to think about these kinds of things instead of the story that they're telling, you will not get as favorable a review. You should have at least one colleague read the manuscript before you submit it. You're not the only one who's read it, and besides, you know everything it says. You've been working on this material for how long? You know those answers. Have somebody read it who doesn't know what it is. And after your colleague has gone through it and you fixed it, proofread the manuscript again and pull out anything else that might have crept in. Often you'll be asked to convert it to a particular form. Sometimes they'll take Word, sometimes they want it in a template, sometimes they want it as a PDF. But you'll be asked to put it in some form before you submit it. You've got to have a cover letter. Always include one, even with an electronic submission. Specify the journal. Indicate why you think the manuscript fits there. Make sure you spell the name of the journal and the editor correctly. It doesn't make a good impression if you get those wrong. You need to identify the corresponding author and provide email, phone, fax, courier, and regular mail addresses. You want the journal to be able to find the corresponding author if there are questions that need to be answered. Usually the corresponding author should be someone who has a permanent position. It's usually not a good idea for students to be corresponding authors. The hope is that within a year or two, they will no longer be at that location. They'll be someplace else. You can suggest an editor and you can suggest a reviewer. And often these requests will be at least partially accepted. They usually will use at least one reviewer if you suggest them. If you can't afford the page charges, this is where you often describe it. And if there's anything in particular about this manuscript that needs to be considered, it's a revised version of an earlier manuscript, or it needs to be published as a companion to another manuscript that's being submitted, that should be talked about in the cover letter. You're going to submit a package, usually on the web. Check the instructions to authors and use the journal's website. You virtually never send papers as emails to an editor for high quality journals. The submission process can be time consuming. Oh, it's on the web. It ought to be easy. It's a piece of cake, right? Well, plan for at least 30 to 60 minutes, even if everything is in hand. You've got to have the cover letter. You've got to have the manuscript with tables and legends, and it's got to be in the correct file format. Do they want the tables separate from the manuscript, or do they want them mixed in? Figures, same thing. Correct file format, and make sure they're high enough resolution. You're going to need to have an email and other contact information for all of the authors, and you'll probably have to enter all of it individually. Sometimes you assemble all of the pieces into a single file, and sometimes the journal website does this for you automatically. Now, there are a number of different editors that you can run into, and many people serve on editorial boards for a long time. As you can see in this cartoon here, the oldest fossil known was found, and the question being asked is, which editorial board was he on? The goal for everybody in this process is to publish good science in an understandable format. They may have different names for the same function. The managing editor is usually the only one who's being paid, and what they're doing is managing the finances of the journal, and they're managing the logistics of getting papers sent to and from a publisher, and sometimes they're also responsible later on for the proofs. The copy editors also will be paid. These are people copy editors are great because they'll fix problems with your English in your manuscript. Copy editors are not so great because they're usually not scientists. And so when they fix the English, they may fix it wrong. Thus, the less there is for a copy editor to do, the better off you will be in the end. The editor-in-chief usually means there are a number of editors who are making decisions. And the editor-in-chief is the person who represents the journal when they need to talk to the publisher or when they need to talk to the scientific society that covers things. The editor-in-chief usually cannot reverse editors' decisions, although sometimes they can. The editor is the person you really care about because that's the person who's going to read your paper, who's going to assign it to reviewers, who's going to read the reviews, and is going to make a decision for what you need to do to have the paper accepted. The editorial board usually is a series of people who are used as regular reviewers by the journal. And there may be as many as several hundred of these per journal. And finally, there are ad hoc reviewers. Those are people that the editor goes, oh, well, I know someone who really knows a lot about this, and they'll send the paper to them. They're not formally a part of the journal. If you want to see who's likely to be reviewing your paper, find the flag page of the journal Usually they'll list the the editors and the editorial board. And one issue a year, they usually will list all of the ad hoc reviewers that were used in the previous year. If you find the names of people in your area that you know, those are people that are good to suggest as reviewers, and also to realize that the journal has used them and may well use them again. When the manuscript hits the editor's desk, he's going to look at the format and he's going to assign it to a corresponding editor if it isn't already there. There will be a letter, usually it's an email, of receipt that'll be sent to the corresponding author, and in many cases to every author. The editor reviews for appropriateness. Oh, gee, this is a paper about elephants and it's a microbiology journal. And if it is appropriate, if it's not appropriate, it goes back. If it is appropriate, then reviewers will be selected and will move from there. The manuscript goes to the reviewers and the review process goes. The review process is usually run completely by volunteers. There are very, very, very few journals that will pay someone to review a manuscript. Usually you'll get 2 or 3 anonymous reviewers, and the length of time it takes depends on the journal. 30 days is a common minimum. 60 to 75 days is about average. If it gets to be 90 days, you probably should contact the editor and go, hey, what happened? Did it get lost? And hopefully they'll just tell you, no, I'm waiting on one reviewer who hasn't gotten back to me yet. A few quotes about the review process. The system of peer review, wherein anonymous reviewers funnel comments about your typescript back to you through the editor, is rarely a wholly pleasant one, no matter how common it is. The object of the reviewers is to find things that might be wrong with your paper and ways to help you change it to make it better. Here's another quote. The peer review process is not a perfect system, and it isn't. It's not really set out, for example, to identify fraud, although sometimes it does catch it, but it is a necessary one. So when you get a critical review, it's not a personal attack, and it's not an affront to your professional image. Believe me when I tell you that I've seen more than one critical review of a paper that I've published. And I've also written more than one critical review of papers that colleagues I know well have published. The comments are about the manuscript, not about you or your science or your abilities. Reviewers are usually asked to adopt the viewpoint of being the author's ally. Often they're supposed to separate comments for the editor and for the author, and they're asked usually to focus on science, not on style. The only time they focus on style is if it's so poorly written that it's impossible to understand. An unpublished manuscript is confidential and you can't share it, even with other people in your lab or in your department. You have to have permission from the editor if you're going to share it. Above all, do not discuss the manuscript with the authors. You're probably not going to talk to the authors unless you think the paper is pretty good. But remember, there will be at least one other reviewer and an editor with a comment, and they may or may not agree with you. If you call and talk to the authors and say, hey, I just reviewed your manuscript and it was wonderful, they're going to feel pretty good. And then if they get a letter from the editor that says, I'm sorry, your paper is rejected, then they're going to be mad at the editor when they shouldn't be, because the editor is putting the pieces together. The other thing is provide the review within the time specified by the editor. Nobody likes to wait. And if you've got a potential conflict of interest, gee, that's my brother-in-law, for instance, or I've worked with them on a grant for the last 25 years. You need to tell The reviewer needs to tell the editor that before doing the review. The format usually for a review is you get a first section that summarizes the content and provides an overall evaluation. If there are major criticisms, they have to be substantiated, especially if the claim is that the work is not novel. There will be a second section that has a numbered list of specific points. And you'll have to go through to respond to all of these. The review usually recommends accept, reject, or modify only in confidential comments to the editor. Remember, it's not the reviewers voting whether your paper is accepted. It's whether the editor thinks it's worthwhile. The content questions they ask, you know all of these questions are coming, so make sure your paper answers them. How significant is the research question? To what extent is it novel and original? Did they design the experiments the right way? And did they conduct them the right way? Did they interpret the data they got correctly? And are conclusions supported by the data? Is the discussion relevant? Having 3 pages of discussion could be a good thing, or if only 1 page is relevant to the topic at hand, could be 2 pages that need to be deleted. And have they got all the right references to make the reader and the editor believe that you've got all the correct background there and you're still telling the story from the proper angle? Format, usually they'll ask you to comment briefly on format. Does it adhere to the journal's format? Is it organized appropriately? Do you need all of the figures and tables? Is it an okay overall length? Are they using acceptable nomenclature? Are the references all accounted for and in a proper form? And is the style adequate? Different journals enforce these rules with different levels of rigor. Some will tell you they'll take a manuscript in any format, and some will tell you that it has to be just in our format. So the editor is the one who's making the decision on your paper. And the editor is guided by the reviews, but it's still a decision that's solely that of the editor. It can be the opposite of what the reviewers recommend if the editor finds a problem. 3 basic responses: accept, modify, and reject. If you get an accept letter, then it's time for a party. You don't get a huge number of those in your career. You wait for the proofs and you're ready to go. When I was editing for Applied and Environmental Microbiology, less than 1% of the articles of the manuscripts submitted would give you an accept letter on the first submission. Usually there were some things you needed to go back in and revise. A modified letter, okay, you're going to have to make changes in the manuscript and you're going to have to respond to every point in every review. How do you fix it? Is it relevant? How do you explain it? What have you done? You need to respond to the very letter exactly what they're asking you to do, as well as to the intent of the suggestion. If you can see that there's something there and what they're really asking you to do is give a better explanation of something that they didn't understand, that's very different than sometimes responding to the point that they need to be explained. If you make additional changes beyond those that are listed in the reviews, you have to identify them and explain them. Because often they may, if they add something substantial, they may need to go out for review. There's usually a deadline to return those. Send those things back in on time, or you may get to go all the way through the review process again. At Applied and Environmental Micro, we used to send out somewhere between 1/4 and 1/3 of the the manuscripts would get a modified letter. Effectively, that was our acceptance rate. The revised manuscript, follow the journal's format, send it back to the proper location. Usually it's to the web page, sometimes to the editor. Include a cover letter, and they will have assigned an manuscript ID to the paper. Make sure you include that in the correspondence. You can now suggest figures and tables, locations, usually with a margin note. And sometimes they want 2 copies of the manuscript, one with track changes so they can see all the changes that have been made, and the other of the new version with all of the changes accepted. Now, if you get a reject letter, this is often the way that you feel. You feel that here are the reviewers, here's the editor, and they're just getting ready to jab that pencil right into you and kill you. And the comment that is over here is very important. Yeah, but at least he makes an effort to personalize every rejection letter instead of sending out a form letter. Scientists are very lucky. We get very detailed comments back, usually on our articles, whereas our colleagues in the humanities often get, dear sir, I'm sorry, your paper does not suit our needs at this time. So, evaluate the reviews and identify the problems, because there are problems or it would not have been rejected. And it could be anything from, it's not a good fit for this journal, to, boy, did you really screw something up by thinking about it the wrong way. You can revise and resubmit to the same journal. Sometimes they'll even ask you to do that. You can revise and resubmit elsewhere, in which case you don't have to tell them that it's ever been rejected someplace else. But don't lose hope. Don't lose your temper. These were really common. We sent out 3/4 of the papers got one of these at AEM. It's really important not to take rejection personally. Look for the good points and build on them, because the reviewers usually will identify some good points in the paper. If there's one reviewer who says it's wonderful and one that says it's awful, which is not an uncommon problem, although not necessarily to that extreme, then you may have to talk to the editor to figure out which comments were viewed as serious and were the ones that they based their decision on. You can rebut the comments and resubmit, but don't pretend to have fixed something if you really haven't done it. If you can't fix it, you're going to have to send it someplace else. Don't try to guess who the reviewers are. This is a favorite sport of scientists, and they're awful at it. In general, in my 10 years with applied environmental micro, I didn't have anybody get a reviewer right. And like I said, if you send it to another journal, then you don't have to tell them it had been rejected before. And be diplomatic. It might feel good to lose your temper and to yell and scream. Resist the temptation. Be diplomatic. You may want to send another paper that direction in the future. Now, there's some things not to tell the editor. So remember when you tried to milk the cobra and were wondering where all the venom had gone? Well, it's over here, there, in the letters to the editor. So here are some things not to say. First, don't just say, well, I don't understand why it was rejected. Everything looked okay to me. Of course, we hoped it looked okay to you. Why would you submit something if it didn't look okay? It does no good to say I've recently published in a high prestige journal, or my age factor is whatever number it might be, or my previous papers have been cited so many times. That's not what this is about. It's about the current paper. It's not about you. My friend just won the whatever prize and he thought the paper was great. Well, That's nice, but the reviewers and the editor didn't think it was so great, or they wouldn't have recommended rejecting it. It's very important not to say that the reviewer or reviewers who disagree with me know usually absolutely nothing about the topic. Remember, the editor knows who the reviewers are, and you don't. And one of them might even be someone you suggested. And if you suggested a reviewer who knows absolutely nothing about the topic, then that's not looking good on you. And finally, this is one that will not get your paper accepted. You should accept this article because you published one that was worse than this last year. No. Never give that as a reason. Fields move in advance, and what's acceptable one year might not be acceptable in the next year. I think we're going to call it quits here because we're at the hour. Everybody should have access to a PDF that's got all of the things that I was going to talk about in it, and you can go through that. Most of the rest of this is relatively terminology. Copyright you have to watch for. It's a legal barrier to duplicate publication, and it's for both electronic and printed journals. And you have to usually transfer the copyright to the publisher. Sometimes the copyright transfer form has to be signed by all the authors, sometimes just by the corresponding author on behalf of everyone else. If you work for a private company, then usually the employer must sign. And if you're employed by a government, then there can be various things as to whether you can copyright anything at all. So final thoughts. If it's important, you can get it published. It's very important to publish because it's the way the rest of the world gets to know you. Presentation matters. It's important that it's good, that it's easy to read, and it's easy to see. No matter how mad they might make you, reviewers are your friends and hopefully keep you from having a mistake live in your library for the rest of your career. Persistence is important. Don't give up. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor Leslie. Thank you very much for sharing the pearls of wisdom with us. Is it okay if you could spend next 5 to 10 minutes answering the questions from the audience?
Sure, I'm happy to try to answer questions.
Yeah.
How are
Sachin
you gonna
Rajput.
do it? Are they
Yeah,
going to come?
No, they're going to ask you orally. Yeah. Sachin
Okay.
Rajput, please. Can you hear me, Sachin? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Use the raise hand option. Okay, Dr. Sanjeev Naika, I will allow you to okay. Dr. Sanjeev Naika, please ask your question. Sanjeev Naika, can you?
Microphone's muted. There we go.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dr. Damodar. My question is that is it possible to request the editor not to send the paper for review to some person?
Yes, you can ask a paper not to go somewhere. And when you do that, usually you need to provide a line or two of explanation for why.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Sunil Srivastava, please ask your question. Sorry, I was muted. Dr. Sunil Srivastava?
Yeah, it was a very informative, detailed lecture, Professor Leslie. We are very grateful to you. I basically, if I would like to submit some review articles. So you mostly talked about the original research articles. So if you can tell us a little bit about the review articles, what we do consider that, or what the editors like to. I'll be very grateful.
Review articles are a whole different story because it depends on
Yeah.
the journal, depends on whether you're writing a mini review or a comprehensive review, whether you're writing a structured review of some sort. All of those come with different types of expectations for the way they're going to be organized and presented. So you have to be sure that it's comprehensive enough to meet whatever thing it is, but you also have to not just be listing off articles, you have to provide a summary and tie pieces together so that there's a new message. We learn something new by reading the review article.
So some novelty should be there. That's what you're
So
indicating,
what should
right?
be there?
Novelty. It's something new
It
ideas.
still has novelty. That's exactly right. The data that go into a review article are the articles that you're reading.
Yeah. So the opinion also is important, and it can be a part of the review, right? Your own opinion.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. You should make clear that it's your opinion. But yes, that's an expected part of a review article.
Thanks very much.
Dr. Vinit Mishra, please ask your question. Dr. Vinit Mishra.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Vele. Thank you, Dr. Leslie, for such a wonderful and informative talk. I just wanted to ask, there is a genie that is out of the bottle now, and that is called AI. So what will be the pros and the cons if the AI is allowed to be used in the in writing the manuscripts and submitting to the journals? What are the good things, and what are actually its disadvantages, or what it will lead to the new researchers that are coming to? So if you can put some light on it.
Well, so AI is still in the process of being developed, and nobody has a magic solution worked out for that. We don't have it worked out for students in our classes who are writing reports, and it's certainly not worked out for what goes into writing a paper for a journal. In general, the best advice at the moment is if you use AI, use it to give you ideas and help you put pieces together, but do not submit something that's been just straight written by AI, because it will probably have mistakes in it. And since you're responsible for the article, that means you're responsible for those mistakes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Lalita Subramanian, please ask your question.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. It was a really enlightening session. So I have got a couple of questions to you. First is generally, if we submit an article to the journal, they remain silent for more than like 5 months. So naturally, a tendency comes that should we wait or shift to another journal. So in that case, what should we do? That is one. And second one, generally, when you publish an article,
The first question I answered in the talk. Anytime it gets past 90 days, you should be contacting the journal and the editor and asking them where your paper is.
Okay. Thank you. And the second question is, in an academic, forum, generally the articles that are published in the Scopus Index are highly valued. So what about the other, journals which are really reputed and having, open access also? So could you just clarify on this?
So things that are indexed in Scopus or Web of Science, those sorts of things, those journals are usually considered higher value journals than the others, and the papers that are published in them are usually considered more important. Oftentimes, those that are not published in such a journal, the general perception is they're not as good, whether they are or not. And the proof really only comes after a journal's been in existence for a few years and can actually, be listed in some of those places. So new startup journals, you've always got the risk that it's not going to be considered as important as if you published in an established one.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Siddharth Anand, please ask your question.
Yes, hello, sir. My question is regarding copyright and sharing of your manuscript with other researchers. So there are portals like ResearchGate where we can upload our manuscripts and share our manuscripts with other researchers. So is there any copyright infringement that we're doing in these cases? As you said in your one of the last, that we are all the authors, the co-authors have shared copyright rights. So any trouble while sharing this data on ResearchGate or any other portals?
If the article is copyrighted, usually the journal owns the copyright. And if that's the case, the journal gets to decide whether the article is shared. Sometimes they never share. Sometimes they share after a period of time, 6 months or a year. If it's published open access, then it can be shared by anyone. And sometimes journals will let authors share on limited sites, but ResearchGate is not a limited site. So you can get in trouble there. I've had some of my books shared on ResearchGate by other people, and I know that they have then been contacted by the publisher and told that they violated copyright doing that.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for participating today and for asking those wonderful questions. Ladies and gentlemen, on the behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to thank today's speaker, Professor John Leslie, for sparing your time and sharing your knowledge with us. Thank you very much, Professor Leslie. And I would like to thank the organizers. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to acknowledge the active participation from the AFB team and the NFCCI team. Thank you very much to every individual who was associated with this event. And lastly, I would like to thank today's audience. You have been wonderful. Thank you very much. And wherever you have a great day. Thank you very much. With this, we sign off. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.